Dan Cordes show, South Africa is a movie. So the National Prosecuting Authority is just about one of the most important bodies in South African life. Its job is to do big research, big investigation, take on the massive cases against the really powerful people, huge corruption charges, massive things the size of state capture and beyond. The kind of stuff which requires an entire organization to go and pursue justice and find out what really happened in South Africa. Unfortunately, the NPA has come under fire in the last handful of months, and to be fair, years, for seemingly screwing up case after case after case and letting powerful people like self-professed prophet or Pastor Omotoso off scot-free. And so tonight, let's look at the National Prosecuting Authority. Is it going really badly? How badly is it going? And what needs to be fixed to bring big-time criminals to justice? And for that, we got the only person we're talking to, in my opinion, don't get bleak about this, on this. Karyn Maughan is here. Hey. So happy to have you back. Okay, the National Prosecuting Authority, just in the last month or so, bungled the Omotoso case of somebody who so many victims came forward and said he had sexually assaulted. They at least were accused of bungling the crucial extradition of Ace Magashule in the Free State. He's on the asbestos trial case. Well, he rather is the subject of the asbestos trial case from state capture. His assistant, apparently they shouldn't have extradited and a judge told them off. And the head of the NPA, Shamila Batoyi, is in a lot of trouble. She's under a lot of fire. How badly do you think it's going? And you can work through all those cases if you like.
No, I think each of the cases that you raised demonstrate serious failings on the part of the NPA. And I think the more profound failing is the refusal to take accountability for this. In the Omotoso case, I think it's particularly heartbreaking because, as you rightly point out, all those women came forward. They were publicly identified. They were vilified. They put themselves on the line, only to discover that because the NPA did not take heed of serious warnings that were made up to 3 years ago in 2021, the judge in that case removes the prosecutor because he's caught lying about contradiction, it's his own part in trying to fudge and get witnesses in that case to perjure themselves because their evidence contradicted their police statements. Though all those things are red flagged, he put all the witnesses on a WhatsApp group. So, I mean, if you ever want like a clear-cut case of potential allegations of witness tampering, there it is. And, it was issue after issue after issue after issue. The judge eventually says, because all these are raised by the defense, actually, you know what? I'm going to allow this trial to proceed, but I'm removing this prosecutor. It's not the NPA that does it. And then we have this extraordinary situation where Omotoso is in the dock, and he's now going to face accountability for what he's done. And he faces a completely substandard cross-examination that is just like, oh, this witness says this, what did you say? It's no attempt to probe, and the judge says, you don't try and get to the truth of that. So the man walks. The NPA is now saying, oh, we're going to appeal it. First of all, I think that within the landscape of hope there's proverbial snowball's hope in hell, but maybe I'll be surprised. But even if that happens, Dan, the guy is in Nigeria.
He's fled.
And he's going to, can you imagine the NPA bringing an extradition application if they win that appeal? And then he just produces the trial record and says, the prosecutor lied. I'm not going to get a fair trial in South Africa. You can't extradite me.
Disaster.
He's 66. So, there's this always this strategy of using we're going to appeal as a kind of mechanism to say, well, let's not interrogate what exactly went wrong here.
Yes.
And I think that that's part of the problem in that particular case. And, we've spoken as News 24 to Cheryl Zondi and some of the other complainants in that case. And they feel, it's heartbreaking to put yourself, as someone who has gone through, and now unproven sexual assault, but I mean, for those women to step forward in the public domain and talk about how they'd been abused, some as young as 14. And to be let down like this is an indictment on the NPA.
So that's the first one, and maybe the most high-profile one. But the other thing that people say about the NPA is we did a whole state capture commission and nobody is in orange overalls. Not even one person. From all those mountains of evidence, billions of rands spent, I think, in the end, or at least hundreds of millions. And the big case that the NPA has put together as the first one is against Ace Magashule in the Free State, Edwin Sodi and the rest over the asbestos scandal, that fraud and corruption trial. And then last week or the week before, a key witness in the case who had been extradited from the United States, forced to come back from the US to be here, the assistants of Ace Magashule, who had probably allegedly sent all these emails ordering the corruption on behalf of Magashule, the NPA just got wrapped over the knuckles by the court saying you weren't allowed to bring her back. So they now have to appeal that too. So what's your take on that?
I mean, that situation is incredibly dire. Because what had happened there, you know, we all understand that if, for instance, the Supreme Court of Appeal gives a ruling within South Africa's judicial environment, they're second only to the Constitutional Court. And so if you get a ruling out of the SCA, it sets precedent for everyone else. And what happened in the SCA was that there was this extradition matter involving a very famous celebrity artist from Las Vegas called Jonathan Schultz. And he had been potentially wanted in South Africa for a potential extradition. They hadn't actually bought that extradition on sort of charges of you know, unwrought metals stealing and selling them, et cetera, et cetera. So he challenges it on the basis of many other bases, but one of them is, you know what, the NPA doesn't have the power to extradite me. This has to be a function of the Justice Minister.
Right.
And, you know, he loses in the High Court, but he wins in the SCA because the court says, look, it's the Justice Minister that signed the extradition agreement with the United States. Ergo, we believe, and they cite all the international law and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This has to be a Justice Department competence. So they knew, and this is raised by Piet Loubser in the Free State High Court when he gives this ruling on the Charlotte matter. They knew in May 2024. And the order for Charlotte's extradition, who's a very pivotal, she was going to potentially be a state witness, but then they decided to charge her because she flipped and said, yes, you know, she didn't want to, her version of that is that she didn't want to say that Ace Magashule was the person that ordered her to send those emails to murdered businessman Igo Pambeni, who was a major beneficiary of this asbestos scam thing. So they know the order for her extradition is given 2 months later, according to Loubser's ruling. So there's all this time where they know there's a legal ruling that says the Justice Minister must do this. So no one intervenes, right? 5 months after this judgment comes out, and allegedly on Andrew Chalke's version, he's an NPA boss, because of the GNU, they decide that they're going to attempt to appeal this ruling. And in that application, they say this is going to affect 89 extraditions. Wow. So it's not just Charlotte. There's some seriously highly implicated people in corruption cases. These are matters around the world where the NPA has applied for extradition. And he's like, if we don't get to appeal this, this is going to cause a crisis. Yeah. But then Shamila Batoy,
head of
like
NPA.
they make a decision that they're going to withdraw that appeal. Because on Shamila Batoy's version, which she provides in an affidavit where she attempts to withdraw the withdrawal, she says, no, we thought that we could just negotiate it with the Justice Minister and like make this whole thing work. And we didn't realize that this, judgment was going to potentially have a kind of retrospective effect. Yeah. We thought that we'd be able to go into the High Court, which we all know is lower than the SCA, and say this judgment cannot be retrospective on this application, on this particular extradition. And now we see with Charlotte, as Judge Piet Loubser has pointed out to all of us, that that's not the correct argument. And the NPA concedes that and is now attempting to appeal solely on this issue of retrospectivity. Yeah. But again, I mean, given the history, and Jonathan Schultz's lawyers have rightly pointed out, the NPA never argued this point of retrospectivity in any of the other cases. So for them now in the Constitutional Court to bring up a point that hasn't been argued before is a pretty tall order.
Yeah, and so that's just two of many messes involved in the NPA, and frankly, impotence, the fact that all of these state capture cases and the rest haven't led to any meaningful or close to any convictions at all. And you mentioned Shamila Batoy, who's the National Director of Public Prosecution, so it's her job to head the NPA. A lot of the criticism has fallen at her doorstep. She's been in that position for a long time now. She has to retire in a year or two's time. But how do we fix the NPA? Because we need a functioning NPA to capture the big people and to take out seriously enormous criminals who have stolen countless sums of money from South Africa and its people.
You know, I think that it's wrong to blame her for the collapse of the NPA. I think the NPA has been under considerable pressure and damage for quite some time. And that really comes down to, you know, what we're seeing now being potentially, being investigated by the Kampepe Commission.
Yeah.
And that's the alleged interference on behalf of the Mbeki administration in the prosecution of apartheid-era atrocity cases.
Yeah, so we're now seeing allegations that the NPA has been meddled with and undercut by politicians for decades.
Yes, and from Vusi Piccoli, who is the former National Director of Public Prosecutions.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because the timeline of that alleged political interference with those TRC cases, where, you know, there is, at least in the instance of the Cradock 4, which is currently playing out, very high-level evidence of the apartheid government, including, amongst others, F.W. de Klerk, being at a State Security Council meeting that orders the murders of those teachers. And that was never properly investigated. And, you know, it contributes to this environment where we now see people talking about white genocide in an environment where there's never been high-level accountability for state-sanctioned extrajudicial murders in this country.
So
this is not just a Shumila Batoy issue.
Totally.
This is beyond but yes.
And
sorry.
so, no, don't worry about it. So my final question then, because we're running out of time, I'm so sorry, is how do we fix the NPA? Like, what are 2 or 3 key things that just have to happen to get this functioning? How do we get the politicians' fingers out of this?
Well, I mean, Glynis Breitenbach, who's a DMP, is talking about creating a totally separate body because she says the NPA is essentially so rotten that we can't try and, you can't revive a horse that's been decomposing for 5 years.
Yeah.
You've got to actually just get yourself a new horse, which is essentially what she's proposing with the issue of corruption, which is where some of the major problems lie. But it's bigger than that because the Justice Minister, the President, these are people who have power. They don't have the ability to interfere in the business of the NPA, but they do have the ability to say, like, what the hell's going on here? We need accountability.
Yeah.
And it's just, you know, it's been called the National Postponement Authority. And I like to call it the National Paralysis Authority.
Good.
Because they're paralyzed.
Yeah.
And it means that people who have taken the very brave step, like those women in the Omatosa case who come forward, whistleblowers on corruption, people who literally have to go into hiding, are having their lives destroyed with no guarantee of justice. And that is not in the interest of any of us or anyone who wants this country to work.
Totally right. Well, one thing I'm very grateful for is that Karyn Maughan reports on this. Karyn Maughan, everybody. Isn't that extraordinary? Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.